It's not every day you get a game as amazing as The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's one of Nintendo's most ambitious titles, and to hear that we were getting a prequel to it was exciting to say the least. Does Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity live up to the legacy of Breath of the Wild? Well, not really. Before all of that, let's run down what Age of Calamity actually is. This is a spin-off Zelda title in the same style as Dynasty Warriors. This means it's a 1 vs 1000 enemies type of deal, where you can pull devastating attacks on the opponents and rack up as many KOs as possible. The original Hyrule Warriors was all about fan service, serving as a homage to the entire Legend of Zelda series. Age of Calamity, however, serves as a prequel to 2017's Breath of the Wild, and given the theme of war that was present in that game, it's an absolutely perfect fit for a Warriors-styled game. This game takes place 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, the Great Calamity. This was the backbone of the original game's story, which wasn't heavily explored, so being able to witness these events was a prospect I couldn't refuse. But even from the very beginning of the game, it was obvious that things weren't quite the same anymore. To explain this without spoiling the story, events happened in this game that couldn't have possibly happened in Breath of the Wild. Story beats were changed for the sake of creating a new narrative within this game. It's a decision I don't agree with, and it heavily affected my immersion into this world of Hyrule. Not only are events changed, but this new story isn't even good or interesting either. It undermines not only certain character motives from the original game, but the impact of these events when they eventually came to fruition in Breath of the Wild. Story isn't the most important aspect out there, but when this game is being presented as a prequel to one of the greatest games ever made, then I'd argue it's one of the defining aspects of this game in particular. What makes all of this really sad is that the game itself is actually quite fun. Compared to the original Hyrule Warriors, this game has much more in-depth mechanics, many taken straight from Breath of the Wild. Each character gets their own unique action that heavily alters their gameplay style, and experimenting with how each character played kept me engaged in the gameplay. The game also gets quite difficult towards the latter half of the story, with Guardians and Taluses and Lynels being thrown at you all at once. And while at first this was hard to manage, I eventually got to grips with the difficulty and was having a blast. While the game can get repetitive at times, playing in short bursts is a great time to be had. The game also has a decent amount of content to go through. Although the main story is a bit short, there's many side missions to complete, all utilising different characters to help players become accustomed with their playstyles. I imagine if you're immersed into this game, that this content will last you a decently long time. The presentation of the game is both impressive and disappointing. Visually, the game looks great, emulating the style of Breath of the Wild perfectly. It almost feels like I'm playing in the original game's engine. It doesn't feel like a cheap knockoff at all. However, where it falters is its performance. The game chugs hard and often, making the intense action of the game incredibly hard to follow at times. It got to the point where it looked like a slideshow presentation, and I had to pause my game because I couldn't make out what was happening at all. It's hard to believe that Nintendo would publish a game in such a bad state, and it was the one constant that hindered the gameplay throughout my playtime. They did nail one aspect of the game though, the music. Not only do we get new remixes of classic Breath of the Wild tunes, but we also get new pieces that help to build the grandiose atmosphere of this game. It definitely matches up to the music of the original game, and even outshines it in some regards. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Best of all, they let you listen to the entire soundtrack in the game itself, as well as look at character portraits, cutscenes, and more. I appreciate this inclusion, and I just wish more games did it. This game conflicts me so much. The music is great, the game is fun to play, it looks and feels like Breath of the Wild. But the bizarre changes to the story and major performance issues really make this one hard to recommend for die-hard Breath of the Wild fans, especially those who want to see the lore open up. However, if you don't really care about the story and you can look past the performance issues, then I can see this being a decently fun time. I just really hope that Breath of the Wild 2 doesn't take any cues from this game.